We live? Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, the live video podcast for people who love to talk about movies as much as they love watching them. We've got quite the show for you tonight, and just a quick kind of heads up, we're going to be discussing the film Polytechnique, which is Denis Villeneuve's fictionalized account of the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal. And so, of course, we're going to be discussing sexualized violence, misogyny, suicide, and all in a political context, not just in a film context. So, and it is real events that are within our lifetime. So just a heads up to you folks. Because, yeah, in the actual event, 14 women were murdered, another 10 injured, another 10 women injured, 4 men were injured by a misogynistic young man who, in the worst act of political violence in Canada, at least to that date, and I think even since then, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Anyway, now what I want to do, folks, is welcome the co-founder of our show here, my co-host and my good friend, Mr. Jim Chaboyko. How are you doing, my friend?
Nice to be chatting again here, and yeah, je suis unmuted.
You are. I might have cut off a word.
Okay,
but you are unmuted. Yes, sir.
I've had worse. I'm just kidding.
Jim, before we get into this flick, last winter, we decided to not do a deep dive into another film about a different horrific act of sexualized violence, Canadian director Sarah Polley's Women Talking. Now, myself, I feel that was the right call, and that discussing this film is also appropriate. I don't feel that there's conflict there. That said, I wanted to hear your thoughts before I elaborated on mine.
Sure. Well, you know, one of the things is that Women Talking had a great deal of publicity. You know, I'm going to come at it from the pragmatic side. You told me initially where to find this. You know, you had suggested we do that at Polytechnique this week, and you said, and I said, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to have to go through all these streaming things to figure out where it is. It's not very available. I mean, it is available. I eventually did get it, but I got it off Topic, which is a streaming service for crime shows, kind of powered by Vimeo, so it's sort of a second-rate thing. Yeah. But for such an important thing, and by such an important director, and such an important Canadian story, and something with 88%, not that this is a great barometer, but on Rotten Tomatoes, you would think that it would be more available, that it might be on Canopy, perfect for something like Canopy. It might be on Hoopla. It might be on CBC Gem. I mean, it's a Canadian movie that won Canadian Screen Awards. At the time, we called them the Genies. And it's really, unless you were super motivated to find it, and you knew exactly where to look, it's pretty hard to find. And that's straight. I think it's an uncomfortable movie. It's not something that people, I think, gravitate to. At the time, there was articles, think pieces about how this is not going to make money because nobody wants to revisit it. It was only at the time, 2009, so 20 years before. So I'm thinking about, you know, this is one of the movies in the big streaming revolution that might be lost in the shuffle. And that's one aspect that I thought is a good reason to call attention to it. You would think it would be more available. Yeah, so that's one thought. The other thought too is that this one involves both its effects on women and men, and we'll be getting into that later, I'm sure. Interestingly, on one of the posters I saw, of the three names, one was a woman, the other two was the killer and who they refer to as the killer, and then the other one of the other gentlemen in the cast.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's sort of not just women, but there's its effects on men as well.
Yeah. You know what, Jim, I'm so glad I asked you. I didn't even think of about this film as a part of the conversation and how hard it is to find. But you're absolutely right, and thank you for bringing that up. It's one more great reason that a couple of middle-aged white guys should be talking about this film, because we might be some of the very few that are talking about it online. The other reasons, and one of them I think overlaps with what you're talking about. In Women Talking, it is about a bunch of women talking about their experience about a horrific thing that happened and how they were going to deal with it. And there's a character, there is a man, a male character who is a man in the film, but he is there strictly to witness. And I think for us, that it was important that we just kind of go, you know what? We can just witness the film. And and when we talked about it in a review, we were both, if memory serves, we know it have been enthusiastic. Oh, a great time at the movies. But we were encouraging people to see this film.
Yeah.
And so, whereas this one, because it happened in Canada, although there's a lot of Canadian tie-ins to Women Talking, this was actually speaking to an event that happened in our lifetimes. We were young men when the actual massacre happened. It is about what a young man did and about an anti-feminist, misogynist young man and what he did in 1989. And that I think this is the kind of film that men should be talking about and talking about their experience, not, and I don't mean, what about wither us, Jim? But I mean and we'll get into it a bit when we get into the spoiler zone, but that men should be talking about male sexual violence, sexualized violence, violence against women, because, you know what, to put it crassly, we're the doing it. And so it is important, I think, for us to talk about these things that are made, specifically talking about one incredibly horrible incident. The other thing is I identified clearly at the top of the show that what the guy who actually committed the massacre in 1989 and what the character, the killer, it identified only as the killer within the film, so I won't name the previous individual who did the actual committed the massacre. They are both it was a political act. And I'll get into that more in detail, why I feel that way when we're in the spoiler zone. And so, of course, and you know my feelings on movies, Jim, especially this one. Making this movie was also a political act, a cultural act, an artistic act, but a political act. And so it's in keeping that you and I, especially the way you and I have looked at films, and especially me, but you know that critiquing films, participating in culture this way, especially with a political film like this, is also a political act. And so I thought it really was, yeah, this is where we can chime in, where our voice is not just we're not just a couple of holes on the internet going, let me tell you women what the problem is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of my take on it. But I really appreciate, I'm so glad I asked you before I went on and on and on. And then I gave you a heads up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one more question before we get into it. And I see we already got, we do have somebody in the chat, DMG. Hey, good to see you there, man.
Hey, Brian.
One more question before we get into it, Jim. What are your memories of the actual horrible event?
Yeah, really vivid, actually, or pretty vivid. I lived with my mom at the time. I was a university student. It was the thick of winter, so probably pretty cold. And
December
I think
6th.
Slight tangent, but I think this movie depicts cold really well as well. We're always talking about movies that do cold well, and this one is pretty good with that. And yeah, I had just got, well, it happened, and I didn't realize this until I was looking at the researching this, but it actually, the events went down at about 5 o'clock, sort of end of the day, late afternoon, early evening. It was right near exam time. I think that night, it was a Wednesday. I just looked that up. So it was the middle of the week, and just before Christmas, and you're thinking about all kinds of other things. I had gotten home, probably walked home after studying late, and at the University of Winnipeg, turned on the TV, and I couldn't break away. Like, this was obviously pre-internet. It was all over CTV News. It was all over, CBC. The reports were coming in, and I don't think there were that many details known at the time, but over the few days, they eventually got filled in. But it was horrifying. Like, I was a peer in a way with these people.
Yeah.
I had just, I sort of was dating a woman of that age as well. And even though it didn't go that well, I was still thinking of her. So
you were dating a woman who is not your wife.
No.
Decades.
No, yeah. It was before that. But your thoughts go to the people who, like, oh my God, what if I was in that situation? And it was just very vivid and literally kind of like, my mom had this little TV room, and I just stayed in there for hours and just sort of and just was staring at the screen. And you want it to be, you're like, why are you sure? Is that the final count? Like, you don't want it to be so high. And yeah, it was very, very vivid. I remember that sort of, like, rather than fear, just the shock of it. Just like, how can that be?
Yeah.
It was rattling. I felt rattled as a Canadian and as a young man and as a university student.
Rattled is a great word. I was, if memory serves, some of the left-wing people I was hanging out with at the time, you know what? Violence against women was becoming more and more of a thing that was being talked about, but also a lot of being pushed back on. But what I more clearly remember is my roommate at the time was an engineering student. Of course, this was at the École Polytechnique. The individual who committed these horrible murders was blaming these women who are engineering students for all the troubles of his life. And Jim, this was, while at the same time at the U of M, active youth feminists at the University of Manitoba were always going after the engineering faculty. Why aren't there as many women in there? And of course, the engineering fraternity. And my roommate at the time, was a frat member, the engineering frat member. Of course, his reaction and the reaction of his fellow students, there isn't a problem. And, all the usual sexist tropes of the time about why there aren't more women there, including one that comes up in this film, but also that idea that the lone nut, not necessarily misogyny isn't a thing, but it's not the thing the feminists are saying, like just a lot of defensive reaction. And this could be me misremembering, like only if a memory serves. But I want to say I kind of gave him the side eye at times, because I'm like, I've been to a couple of your parties. Including at the time, I remember it was still a bit of a topic, but almost a potential third rail, the big winter engineering social, that's kind of my memory. And then it sort of over time, it doesn't fade, but it changes in character.
Yeah, that's very very on the mark for this one. Specifically engineering. That's
Oh yeah, no, it was, and looking back, it's like, I'm not naming the guy, in part because we were all young. I mean, that was the 80s. I'd be lying to say I never called out someone's masculinity with the classic egg, like, so it's I think I was more politically aware and progressive than some, but certainly was no saint. And so I think as a community our opinions have changed some on it. So okay, Jim, now that we've done that, let me let's get to the film at hand. Now, here's my log line. This film tells the story of a few university students trying to help each other survive a killing spree by a woman-hating murderer stalking the halls of a Quebec university. Jim, would you mind giving us the who's who in front of and behind the camera here?
Yeah, so it's as I mentioned before, it's well-known director Denis Villeneuve with an early project of his, written by Jacques Devitz and Denis Villeneuve. Now it says it was produced by Don Carmody, Maxine Remillard, but apparently one of the actresses, Corinne Vanasse, who sort of plays the lead woman, she apparently had a role in talking Denis Villeneuve into directing it. She's gone on. She's now hosting a sort of a reality game show, but she's a fairly popular actress in Quebec. Anglo audiences might know her from Cardinal. Anyway, so it's got Maxime Gaudette, Sébastien Huberdeau, Corinne Vanasse, Evelyn Brochu, Johanne-Marie Tremblay, and Pierre-Yves Cardinal, amongst others. Music by Benoit Charret, and cinematography by Pierre Gill.
Thank you very much, Jim. And of course, I mean, it's still YouTube. I still have to ask for the like, the subscribe, the bell.
Oh, yeah.
I promise you, we don't always dive into this kind of film. I do want to acknowledge our friend of the channel, been on the channel. I've been on his, Dragon Movie Guy, checking in. And he notes, of course, he's in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he has both a recent, like there was a shooting at the University of Las Vegas, University of Nevada at Las Vegas, and it is sexualized and racialized violence, a shooting. And he also has a direct experience with as a news a former ENG photographer and videographer, also experienced with this. And so yeah, it's still sadly, disturbingly sadly, a timely thing to discuss, even though the incidents we're talking about is 1989 and the film was made 14 years ago. Yeah, 14, 15 years ago. I mean, that was 34 years ago that this happened, and we're still, this stuff is still happening with depressing frequency. Anyway,
and the anniversary, of course, the anniversary was just passed this past week.
December 6th. One of the reasons I chose this date, Okay, Jim, let's we're going to get into the spoiler zone now.
Sure.
And again, folks, this is we will be talking about sexualized violence and suicide and a sexualized murder, and so mass murder. So if that's I appreciate if you drop off, because it's like, well, I got to check out of this. All right, Jim. Here's. Let's start with this. What's your general take on Villeneuve's piece here? Just as a movie.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I'll just preempt that by I took a look at a CBC article from 2009, and it basically pitted the for and against. One critic said, "Oh, Villeneuve's got nothing to say new about it. I mean, it's beautifully shot." And then the other person said, "There's a lot to say. It's about a war between the sexes. I think it, holds up." I think because it's 14 years old now, about a 34-year-old event, I think just that the historical document aspect of it is kind of, it sort of brings you back, and it makes you not sort of take it for granted. I don't want to say appreciate it, but like a lot of historical documents, these engineering students are writing their assignments out in pencil. There's beepers. Nobody's got a cell phone. And there's, cell phone being the sort of the easy way to get help these days. So if you're
a woman using a payphone later in the film.
Yeah. And one character has a beeper as well. And not that cell phones are a be all and end all, but so in a way it sort of works for me as a historical document, and it goes to remind you how raw it is. Back in the days of cowboys and Indians movies, somebody would get shot and just sort of collapse, and just like in some of these John Wayne movies, or even some of the older war movies, it wasn't very sort of visceral. This one is, and I think, like, it's hard to brush it away when you see it taking place, when you see like what violence actually is. There was a point in which, a lot of stuff happens in one closed classroom, and the classroom door shuts and all the men leave, and then it follows the men out. And I think, oh my gosh, well, that's an interesting choice. Thank God we don't have to go in the room. Later on, of course, there's a time jump and we end up in the room anyway. So you're like, oh no.
We are not spared.
We're not spared.
Yeah.
And I think that it's confrontational. I think, it's not a kind death. And I think this reminds you of that.
In so many cases, it's quick.
Yes. Yeah. And horrifying, just, to its core. Yeah.
Something you said about choices. And there are a number of them that stuck out for me. Any in particular that come to mind? Like, so Crassus, what are your top three, if you've got three? Particular filmmaking choices.
Where there is a I mean, one of the characters, one of the males who feels that he didn't do enough. One of the male students commits suicide. I think they called him JF or Jeff. And they
Jean-Francois
yeah,
was the character name.
and they don't shy away from that. They show him sort of going through with it, and that's typically not something that you see too often, unless it's the death of a bad guy. But you don't often see that in today's cinema. So that's one choice. And at the very end of the movie, it mentions some of the people that passed away, and one is a name that I was unfamiliar with.
Sartoblay,
Yes.
the actual.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Jim. You continue.
Yeah, no. And I'm glad you said that, because so I wouldn't misremember the name. But his parents apparently as well committed suicide after
several months later. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the waves of this thing go on and on. So that was one choice. The time jumps were sort of another choice. And then there was the killer's last act. He goes into a room. And this is equally horrifying, where he's, shooting through the desks at people, or women underneath the desks.
Yeah.
And then just at that moment, he decides that he's done, I guess, and take his own life. And there's an overhead shot of one of the women that he's killed and himself with a bullet in his head, and their blood sort of merges into one.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that I sort of spent some time wondering what that was about, or if it was just an image or what have. But their pools of blood eventually merged together. I don't think it meant anything peaceful or nice, but it was a definite choice, and that was kind of an interesting one. It still has me thinking a little bit. I'm not sure what I've concluded about that, but yeah, a lot of choices here. Yeah, interesting choices.
A couple that come to mind. For me, definitely the opening scene. Jim, that one bent my brain, gutted me.
Mm-hmm.
And also it's like it's said to me a couple of things. I think this is what the filmmakers were intending. First of all, like the first 30 minutes, it's now all tension. Violence could happen at any time.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of just how from mundane photocopying to bam, bam. And that's the other thing in this that impressed me. And here I can speak from personal experience, not violent. I was a member of the military when I was a kid, Jim. And that reminds me of like full load blank fire when I was on movie sets, but also when you shot at the range at the armory in the basement of the building, that's what real gunfire sounds like in an enclosed space with a lot of concrete around you.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, and how people are like first shocked and they kept building on this, let he be in there with a gun, and everyone's like more just sort of, that's not, what's wrong with this? And then all of a sudden he fires and people freeze for a moment and then they run. And it's that first scene that sort of sets that tone. And so for the rest, or for up until the actual massacre takes place, you are in constant tension.
Mm-hmm.
And that choice blew my mind. It's a weird one where it's like, oh my God. There's an emotional reaction for all the stuff we've talked about, but it's also there's another part of me going, wow, now I'm in the hands of some master filmmakers, who have a very, very clear idea of the mood they want to put me in, which is also the mood of the students just going about their day, especially these women students. Another one that I thought, of course, there's a moment where Stephanie, a character we meet, one of the victims in the film, she is just going somewhere. And again, because it's set in this moment of tension, or in this part of tension, of rising tension, she's going down a hallway and there's a guy at the far end of it, and she goes and she makes some room for the guy. And I'm like, it's one of those weird moments of you're in her space and you're automatically fearful, and because, in part because you're like, when is the mayhem going to start? But also, I think it is, and this is more thinky, but afterwards, I think part of the purpose of the scenes like this is to kind of emphasize, like, if it was a guy walking down that hallway, we'd be like, why are we wasting shoe leather? Because that's the thing they tell filmmakers, editors, directors: do not waste your time on shoe leather. Why are we being walked down that hallway? It's building tension, and it is only building tension because it's not Jean-Francois walking down it. It's a woman student we've already met, one of the engineering students, and so all of a sudden it's like, you're automatically put in her position, and this is before any of the gunplay starts. And you're already kind of, which I think is part of the purpose, how women interact with the space. And I thought that was a choice. The other thing, this was shot in English and French.
Yes, yeah.
Almost like an old 20s, 30s, like an early talkie. Oh, well, just redo the scene because we're paying for you anyway. Let's get all the languages out. But I thought that was super effective, that I was hearing the actors in that uniquely Quebecois French accent, that you and I have grown up with in a way. But they're speaking in English. I don't have to read subtitles, and I'm not getting a crappy dub. Which I think was also a great choice. Of course, there's many others, and I'm sure they're going to come up. But that opening scene and that hallway scene, are just really kind of, kind of hit me, man.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of there's a lot of interesting things that Villeneuve does here, and it totally, it's been with me all day. The movie, I've been sort of revisiting it. I saw something on Twitter about how they clear snow. There was some this is how we clear snow in Montreal, and it had nothing to do with anything, but it was Montreal. So it sort of cast me back, and then I listened to the Tragically Hip song and it's definitely sticking with me.
This was, of all the films you and I have watched since we started this project, coming up on 4 years ago now, Jim.
Yeah.
This is the hardest one yet.
Yeah.
I honestly don't know how I would have been able to make it. Can you imagine watching this in a theater?
No.
Oh,
yeah, no.
Yeah.
You're sort of trapped there, and everything's bigger, and you're, sort of
bigger and louder, and you're with other people. And I don't mean that I'd be afraid of them. Although as a guy, I'd be like, oh, none of us are looking good here. You'd have that weird kind of a gender insecurity, whereas the woman, I don't know, who knows, maybe women watching this theater, it's like, oh, I don't want to, I have to worry about this the rest of my life. Do I need to be, Anyway.
This is actually one that I've wanted to see for a while, but again, it took us 14 years to get to it. So maybe that's saying something as well. I knew this would be a bit of a, as much as I liked the movie, it's hard to talk about it that way, but as well as I thought it was done, it did take you and I a number of years to get to it finally. But it's that being in the room, like, at what point do you say, you know what I'm in the mood for today? Something like this. And it doesn't really come up. I'm not trying to be funny, but you know what I mean? Like,
but I'm going to give you some levity without taking away from the weight of what we're talking about. I watched Wall-E after it.
Oh,
just because.
Just a cleanser.
I'm like, I don't need this weighing on my heart right now.
Yeah.
I need to see some joy and connection. I just, come on, robot.
That's a good choice. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Jim. What do you think black and white brought to the film, or not?
That's a good question. I thought it worked well. In terms of meaning in black and white, it may have dulled. You can say that. I mean, it's obviously a movie with a lot of blood, and then that's got its own sort of. You could argue that it's sort of. That's a tricky one, eh? Does it make it less vivid? I mean, it still shows a lot of violence, but it's quite brutal, instant, in your face kind of stuff. That's a good question.
That, you know what, you made me think here. Like, I wasn't sure where I was going with this, and I wonder, so the scene opens on the photocopier.
Yeah.
Later on, Jean-Francois comes across this woman who's been shot, leaning up against the photo, and she's getting worse. And imagine watching that, because she's been shot in the shoulder, she's bleeding, he's going to help her. He's kind of, he's going through trauma.
Yeah.
I wonder when the shot goes to her, looking at him, because it's in black and white, we're focused on her eyes. And what I thought was fear, because she's like, are you the guy who shot us up? Like, they all look the same, and what is she afraid? Is this person really going to help her? And she's going through trauma herself, of course, having just been shot. And whereas if it was color and it was blood, maybe that would take over.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah.
That's just a thought. I do get where there were a couple of critics who were talking about when you think black and white, you think arty, and they're. And it's Denis Villeneuve, and so you could see why that would come to mind and how that might take some of the sting, the visceral sting out of it. But maybe we as an audience, or maybe they're like, no, we want to give people enough of a remove. It's going to be a hard enough ride. Let's give them a little bit of a remove so that they stick with us to the end, so they don't totally tune out. That's just me thinking out loud.
I can see where that, looking for the right word, where the red would be a distraction, or it might be it might take over a scene, as you're sort of suggesting here. I would buy that. I mean, ultimately, I'm not a cinematographer nor a filmmaker, but that sound is as good as any. There is art in this. It's an artistic endeavor, and so there's shots of, there's several shots where it's not just left to right, but somebody might be running and it's up and like he plays with the camera. At one point, it's upside down. I guess maybe somebody's on a stretcher, and you're seeing the the fluorescent lights are on the bottom of the screen, and so they just
put the camera on a pedestal, and then when they show it to us, they're showing us the frame upside down.
Yeah, Yeah,
Just
yeah. That could
like
be.
it, uh, DMG commented about Kevin Smith and Clerks and shot in black and white. And when I was thinking about this question, I got to admit, Jim, I was like, it was back when I first got into film in the 90s, I'd be like, well, black and white's just cheaper. Cheaper for two reasons. A, the film stock's cheaper, developing's cheaper, but also you do not have to match lights. A light's a light in black and white.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't have to worry about, color temperature orange, color temperature blue. Oh, do we have to gel up these windows?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is shot in 2008, 2007. They had none of those worries. Shot it in digital.
Yeah.
Lights that are controllable. I mean, it's not as slick as it is now where my phone can control half the lights behind me. But, I think this is more of a conscious aesthetic choice. Okay, what do you think, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here, I'm kind of jumping into what I think is one of the major themes, toxic masculinity or misogyny. What do you think the film is saying about that? What do you think we're supposed to pull from that, Jim?
Ultimately, it's the one that lashes out that maybe the weak one, the one who's and I think anytime anybody blames an entire group of people on his own faults, this was not to defend him, he was a troubled guy with not a great background, but yeah, sort of blaming all your failures, saying, "Oh, it's this group of people that's not letting
those
me advance."
Viragos, which I had to look up.
Yeah, I wrote that down actually in my book. I was like, Virago.
Yeah, me too. And then I looked it up.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I think, ultimately, he does have the gun. He is the one that unleashes the violence, but he's not operating from a place of strength, I think. And what the real strength is the Val character, Corinne Van
Valerie.
Ness, who has to get up, and her leg's been hit and she's bleeding from the head, and
to go get help for Stephanie.
Yeah. And that's the real strength, I think. And to have the hope, and to have the years after, and to go back into that room, and play dead. And they were sort of,
and have her and her to comfort her friend.
Yeah. And what you were talking about with the woman, the student at the photocopiers, she doesn't know that this is, but
sorry, Jim, you cut out for a sec there. Could you repeat?
Sure.
The girl at the photocopier, she doesn't.
The student at the photocopier doesn't know that the helpful guy that JF is the one that is there to help. He's a helper, as Mr. Rogers used to say, not the shooter. Subsequently, when he goes into the room, Val doesn't know that he's also, same guy, doesn't know that he's not the shooter again. So she says, let's play dead. And so he vacates, thinking that they're all dead. They're all dead. But
they look like the scene, Jim, the scene of a war crime.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was chilling. And you didn't need any close-ups or anything. Like, it was a shot from about 12 feet, 15 feet back. And you're just like, whoa.
Which I think was another great, it had huge impact, great choice, filmmaking choice, great storytelling choice. And oh my God, like by then you're just, this all just sucks. This is a terrible, I'm going through a terrible experience here. And then when you finally see and it's interesting, folks, this is not a documentary, nor even a docudrama. Although, again, one fucking from the Hollywood Reporter referred to it as such. But it does hove quite closely to let's say the main murderous beats,
Hmm.
you know, um, including that's what he did. He went the first thing the actual killer did is go into a classroom, separate the men from the women,
Hmm.
and then once he had the women isolated, shot a number of them. And
Yeah.
that we see it in this film, and how lightning quick, no lead up, no Hollywood
No.
close up, slow move, nothing. Just, it's like cutting. Just a woman who didn't even get to finish her sentence.
Hmm.
Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And and it's like, yeah, I witnessed a war crime.
Yeah.
Um,
You know.
wow.
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
again, like like you said, this movie will stick with me for years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in terms of choices too, another
Yeah,
one, just to answer that earlier question, it was something that I had been thinking about as well, is that they don't, whenever you have a movie, when there's a group of people in an institution, say a large apartment block or a plane a la Irwin Allen, Towering Inferno, one of the airplane movies, um it becomes a who lives who dies kind of thing. And I think one of the choices, by not sticking with the real names, like they gave all the characters different names, is that you
yeah,
don't, it's not a tally, like it's not a disaster movie. It's not sort of gruesome fun like a disaster movie. It's a recounting of the events. And I think that was a smart choice too. I think I have an idea of who Corinne Van Ness is supposed to have played, as a woman who became a gun safety advocate later on. And I just suspect that. But yeah, at no time you're like trying to figure that out. You're just witnessing it, right? And so it's not like those old Hollywood
yeah,
disaster movies do. And not that I think Denis Villeneuve would do that, but in lesser hands, you wonder if it might
yeah.
have taken on that kind of
Well,
scope.
and I'm wondering if it wasn't for Corinne Vanasse, the she played Valerie in the film. Uh, if she wasn't involved so early on, and yeah, according to what we've been able to research in the last few days,
Yeah.
was one of the people who reached out to the victims' families,
Hmm.
talked to a lot of these people. If she wasn't involved, would we have even gotten this movie? Um, and or if we got this movie, would it have been this? Like, and I'm saying, that given her that before Villeneuve, you know, um, yeah, here's this actress, this actor, this performer, passion for the subject, wants to see a movie of it. And
Hmm.
reports are that she was the one who got Villeneuve involved. And that's not just, oh, I got a director who's got a name who can get them funding, but someone who says, this is the guy who can treat the story properly,
Hmm.
to give voice to this horrible event. um Jim, I do want to go back to the what the film is saying about misogyny or toxic masculinity, but I think, yeah, was the actual killer troubled? Absolutely. As was the young man, the killer in
Hmm.
this film. But what I think was a choice, and part of part of the statement, or part of one of the themes it was exploring, is, yeah, he's troubled, but he's not crazy. He's not all sweaty
Yeah.
and smelly and, like an animal or something, or just crazy and barking at strangers and anything. He's like any other tight, high strung young man that we've met a million of.
Hmm.
Um, that the film actually spends enough time with him to go, okay, that's weird and not right, but that's normal. He goes and writes a letter to his mom. He is not described as a crazy,
Mhm.
you know, and I think that's part of it. And I also think the Jean-Francois, not just that it alludes to Sarto Blay, who did commit suicide months later because he was having such a hard time trying to cope with the fact that he didn't do more. You know,
Mhm.
in part because and I think that's saying something about having these two characters and the way they decided to portray them. Jean-Francois sympathetically
Mhm.
and the killer unsympathetically, but not cartoonishly, not a caricature,
No.
and not even evil in a weird way. I think that's what it is, saying something about toxic masculinity, that it's a small step for
Mhm.
a young man to do something like this. And also for Jean-Francois, not given the tools. And I'm not talking about being a hero, because there were the reporters on the day. Why didn't you do anything?
Mhm.
You know, it's like, again, the film does a really good job of showing bam, bam, chaos, running. We all like to think we're a star of an action movie, but that's not the way this stuff works. You
No.
run and you go, oh, I'm alive.
Mhm.
And later on, you find out this thing. And of course, like all survivors, you go, could I have done more? And because
Yeah.
it's a young man guilty about that, he's thinking about, oh, I should have done more. And he's not. When he goes to talk to his mom, another key beat for these young men, that they go to
Mhm.
talk to their mother
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
cannot speak to them.
Mhm.
You know, you look back in this film, it's like, you look back and it's, if only it said, Mom, I can't handle this. I feel
Yeah.
so ashamed. I feel, and he can't. And I think both those are like bookends of the toxic masculinity that creates this kind of crime.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that pieces of like Mark Stein go, well, it's because men have been how did he
Mark
put
Stein.
it? Made submissive. That's how this happened. You, Mark Stein. It's a fucking shit.
It must be nice to know everything about the universe, and and I'm sure he would have sort of, done this with his tie and then
Oh
gone
yeah,
into
just
the
a
breach himself.
reprehensible. Well, and the contemporary and since the event, how feminists have been trying to take it over. It's like, what are you on the murderers team?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually, you know what? You are. You don't think you
Yeah.
are. They all desperately want it to be. It's a lone nut not representing all men, and it's like,
It's not anti-feminist, even though he literally says, "I don't like feminists." How can you claim this guy was anti-feminist? Ooh,
well,
Jesus.
yeah, and yeah. Now, of course, I just kind of told you how I think the film thinks it, but let me ask you this. Went on a bit of a tear there, Mr. Chaboyko.
Yeah, no, no.
Um, what do you think the filmmakers are saying, if anything, about that lone nut explanation of this crime?
Uh yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, they don't, almost like, this sort of reminded me a bit of The Killer, that the literal movie The Killer that we watched a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah,
He virtually has no, except for, in The Killer, it was his girlfriend for a brief couple of scenes.
yeah,
He's got almost no connection. There's no, his roommate says good morning to him in the morning, but it's very sort of just sleepy and dismissive. You don't get the impression that he has I don't think he, until he starts, until he gets in that room, that famous classroom, infamous classroom, I don't think he really talks to anyone. He's either
He
writing
doesn't.
letters or he's just by himself. And I think there's an element of isolation about this. I think, and again,
Absolutely.
not to excuse it. And there's also a weird kind of a logic, because he's planning what I think he knows is, oh yeah, because he's got the gun to his head at the very start in his apartment.
It's like he's practicing.
Yeah.
Because there's no bullets in the gun at the time.
Yeah. And
in the long gun, in the rifle, that was a horrible imposition on farmers that we register these things.
Yeah. So then
I need to say that. You, Alberta, fuck farmers.
Yeah. 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 But he's walking around his apartment, and it's his last day as far as he knows on Earth. And he goes, oh, I haven't done the dishes yet, and so he does the dishes. And it's this really weird kind of logic. And what you're saying is that, yeah, he's not like that mustache twirling insane guy. He's not sort of sweaty and been driven to, he's not influenced by drugs. He's not on a tear. This is a coolly thought out act. And he doesn't even show all that much emotion through most of it, but he has to do the dishes. And
it's also maybe a delay, right? Like I kind of looked at those beats. He's writing his manifesto, or he's going over it in his room, practicing the suicide. Then there's these moments of, well, I'm going to go wash the dishes. I looked at it, the course of his day up until he starts murdering people, as, is he still going to do it?
Okay.
He's stealing himself. He wants to do it. He's got his rationale to do it. But there's that moment in the car where he's just shaking. And I don't think it's because it's cold.
Well, and that too is that how much time and this is a Canadian touch, how much time do you spend in your car in the winter? He spent enough time in the car that the windows have been fogged up and it's covered in snow. So he's been in that car for quite a while.
Stealing himself.
Yeah.
Like
that, like a little igloo,
that kind of having to give himself. I come back to this, Jim, like, we see normalcy in him. Yeah, he's a troubled young man. Yeah, you can even say he's a nut, but I don't think the film said he was just a nut.
Yeah, no, no, I don't think it's dismissive. I think that there's sort of like I don't mean cool as an A, but I mean, there's a cool logic to him and to his thinking, and it's there, and it's not, he's fully invested, and
he's making a choice.
Yeah. And it motivates him enough to go through with this.
And then once he is sitting in that church pew, can we have an iota of pity for the killer? Does this film, I'm not saying, oh, he was just a poor misunderstood boy. I don't think the film's saying that. I'm certainly not saying that, nor did I come away with that feeling, but can we have an iota of pity? The vast majority of the pity to be applied to the actual victims of his crime.
Yeah. I think it's whether you're willing to or not. I'm not, I don't think I'm not, particularly forgiving for that kind of thing. And also the whole act of bringing arms to a place that is going to be unarmed is just probably the most odious kind of thing you can do. That there's going to be carnage and yeah, I just, that kind of, it's like the nadir of humanity, I think, to be able to do that. It really, it really just, and it's that thing where a lot of these times the guys get confronted with, say the police come around and they finally have arms and they're like, no, 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 I'm done, and it's just, it's a combination of cowardice rather, and just anger and hatred and weakness. I think yeah, I just, we've seen it enough, and I just, that the thought that that's an option for you. What do you want to accomplish with your life? I don't get it. But yeah, I mean, I guess you could, but I don't think I'm mature enough, if that's what it is, emotionally, to do that.
I think for the filmmakers here, I don't think they want us to have sympathy for him, but they do want us to recognize his humanity. Like, he's just not some mad dog. Oh, put him down. We don't have a mad dog problem anymore. Like, he caught a disease. One of my guilty pleasures, we've discussed this before, is The Big Bang Theory. If I ever do a piece on it, I'll do a piece about how Sheldon Cooper, the ostensibly presents like he's somewhere on the autism spectrum. I would argue he is the villain of the piece. But in pop culture and in the story world of The Big Bang Theory and in our own lives, he constantly gets an excuse because he's special. And what upsets me about that, and actually kind of upsets me at times, is it's like there is, autism has the autism disorder, the spectrum of autism disorders. Yeah, there's a genetic component to it. There is also an environmental component, but that is a diagnosable and either treatable or manageable disorder, and that we learn more and more about. You know what we haven't found, Jim? The racism gene or the sexism gene. These are all things, the violence, even that kind of violence is not, yes, we all have the genetic potential for violence. There's you know what? We do it when we're under, threat, perceived or real, fight, flight, or freeze. And we saw all three in this film. He was the fight when threatened. His threat was feminist. That said, I think intellectually, viscerally, no. Oh, thank God you're dead. You're not killing anyone else. You remember that maniac, that right-wing maniac, killed all those, murdered all those. Yeah, it's like, which one? The Norwegian one who went to that. It's
Breivik.
Children's camp and shot it up and just murdered a bunch of children. That is alive, got to use the court to expound on his right-wing craziness. Is he crazy? Sure. But there's no crazy that the right-wing part, the violent rhetoric, the violent ideology that is patriarchy. That is not a genetic thing. There's no, we found the disease and here, take this drug, you'll be fine. We'll get
CRISPR?
That misogyny right out of you. We'll clear that up. Oh,
where's the
doctor,
CRISPR?
I'm worried about my son. He's been saying a lot of crazy crap about women. No, we got a pill for that. We got a course of treatment. 6 weeks, it'll clear right up. Keep the guns away for now. That isn't a thing. And so I think and this is where I think intellectually I can have an iota of sympathy for him, because This killer wasn't born, he was created.
Mm-hmm.
He was created by an ideology, that he did not just come up with it on his own. Oh, his feminism got me. It's no. Pieces of shit like Mark Stein,
Yeah.
espoused it. Said, yeah, that's what's keeping you down. That's what's making you submissive. That piece of shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, really. And I think that's where I can intellectually, because it's all, okay, I shouldn't say that. Some of these are cranky old men who shoot up a concert because angry and lots of guns. These men who feel, what you were talking about, weak, impotent, whatever their problem is, but that all those feelings are created by an ideology, just as, and I do think in a way Jean-Francois, well, not maybe to the same degree as the victims who were shot, but he's also a victim of the killer.
Mm-hmm.
And a victim of toxic masculinity, because he could not say, this is what I'm feeling. And he's experiencing this in a society that thinks it's okay to go to, one of the survivors and go, if I was there. Because that's what's built into that reporter's question when he was asking people who got out, why didn't you do anything?
Yeah.
Or that Pat from Hollywood Reporter who's complaining in his review of the film, didn't explore why no one pulled the fire alarm or called the police. I mean, the woeful ignorance that man had of the event itself shows why the film was important to make. It also shows it's like apparently any idiot can do reviews for the Hollywood Reporter.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim. I know I asked the question,
no.
but really I needed to get that out.
No. That's fine. I was going to add something too, but yeah, it's maybe I'll come up with it before we clear off here. But
maybe this is a good time to kind of wrap it up. We always, especially with these films, it's always really tough. But I do have, I think I've got one question I wanted to ask you that I thought would kind of summarize this, help close it off before we get into, well, maybe not final thoughts, but we'll get to that in a second. Where is that? Oh, yes. Jim, did watching this film change how you think and how you remember the actual event, the actual massacre at École Polytechnique de Montreal on December 6, 1989?
No, I think it reinforced sort of a lot of the sensory aspects of it, not having been there, but I mean the university setting, the sort of the way the students dressed, the way that they sort of carried themselves through the day, very, hit all those notes. Like it felt like spilling his coffee on the report that he was writing in pencil, that kind of thing. It brings me, right back. So there's that authenticity. And then, it was always an act of, if you dare go there, an act of imagination, like what happened, like what was it all about? And that's, if that's all I get, if watching this is all I get, that's good for me. It not a curiosity thing, but yeah, it's going to go through your head. Like, how did this go down? Yeah, so I think that it, in a way, again, not a documentary, but in a sort of a spiritual way, it maybe helped fill in the blanks a little bit. And it just made it, it brought it home just how, 34 years ago, the only thing that separates that and now is time. These are horrible events that took place. And we should not forget this.
Yeah. You know what, Jim, for myself, Well, maybe this speaks to the one thing I do have to say that maybe speaks to one of the weaknesses of the film, and that's I really want, and weakness is maybe too strong a word. The film ends on what some have said a bit of a pat ending, a bit of a sop. I got to admit, as an audience member, Jim, I appreciated the way it ended
Yeah.
with Valerie
Well,
involved in a relationship, learns she's pregnant. We see her as a mechanical engineer working in aerospace, something she dreamed of. And she calls her father, and she writes a letter to a mother, and the mother of the killer.
yes. Yeah.
But we are like kind of on a positive note. But here's the flaw, maybe. It still comes down to her saying, if you're a son, I will teach you how to love.
Mm-hmm.
I got to admit, between you and I, Jim, it's like, no, teach him how to talk about his feelings at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we could all use. That's what I could have used when I was a kid. Here,
Mm-hmm.
just because you're a man doesn't mean you can't talk about it. Tell us what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's maybe, how can we manage that feeling? That.
Yeah.
And if it's a girl that the world is hers. Great sentiments, but it's like we have a political act in what the killer does. This movie is a political response. Call to action.
Mm.
And this film kind of puts it on the woman as the mother, and we come back to themes of motherhood here. It's like, no, it's systemic. This kind of violence is actually systemic. It's not a lone nut. It's a feature of our system right now. We need systemic solutions to it. And I think watching this film is now how I see that. I see that more clearly than I did when I was a young man. Sure, talked about violence against women, but also from a bit of a guilt perspective. Not that I hit any woman, but you benefit from that fear, whether you know it, see it, or not. You weirdly benefit from it. I rarely worried about walking down a hallway alone or seeing another guy. Not part of my standard MO. What I do think it changed, or maybe it made me realize, is like, no, I'm more angry about the incident and these incidents, outraged. And I think that's a good thing. I don't want to come out of that movie kind of going, oh, well, I sure hope these women raise better boys.
Yeah.
Christensen out. It's like, no, I want to, and maybe this is what I can do, is you and I engaging in this honest conversation about this, or as honest we can be in an hour on the internet.
Yeah.
That's maybe how the film does change my feelings about the actual events. It's probably also affecting my memory of the actual events. I'll always think of this film when somebody says it'll be suddenly in black and white. Even though we had color television, Jim, I saw this in color.
CTV 11 o'clock news. Yeah. With Lloyd Robertson probably. And yeah.
All right. I think, folks, we're going to end this on a different note. Going to, instead of the usual, I'm going to read off the victims on the day. And that starts with Geneviève Bergeron, born in 1968, a civil engineering student. Helene Colgan, a mechanical engineering student, born in 1966. Nathalie Croteau, born in 66, mechanical engineering student. Barbara Degnon, born in 1967, mechanical engineering student. Jesus, Jim, they're all our age.
Oh, yeah.
Every one of them. Sorry, I just had to note that. Anne-Marie Edouard, born in 1968, chemical engineering student. Maud Javiernek, materials engineering student, born in 1960. Maurice Lagagne, born in 1964, budget clerk in the school's finance department. Maurice Leclerc, born in 66, materials engineering student. Anne-Marie Lemay, born in 1967, as a mechanical engineering student. Sonia Pelletier, born in 1961, mechanical engineering student. Michelle Richard, born in 1968, materials engineering student. Annie St. Arnaud, born in 1966, mechanical engineering student. Annie Turcott, born in 1969, materials engineering student. And last, Barbara Kluznik Vidajuits, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, born in 1958, a nursing student. Yeah, folks, in memoriam, thank you so much for watching this, and try and think of something you can do to forward the agenda to stop violence against women. Anything else you wanted to add, Jim?
No, that's a good ending.